theme of this series is identity in general, and all its myriad guises, then what we tell ourselves about ourselves is tonight's topic. The blurb literally said, are we really a nation of can-do, innovative, kid-friendly, outdoorsy people, or are we crime-ridden, unproductive, credit-junky, obesity-epidemic dreamers, passionate or purposeless? So yes,
both those things.
And you can be, which I think we should discuss later. In other words, is our national self-image in breach of the Fair Trading Act? What do we see when we look in the collective mirror, and what kind of collective self-image have we constructed for ourselves as a people? Of course, we all think different things about ourselves at different times. I can be filled with the joys of life and the potential for good in my fellow man one morning, and despair about the human condition that afternoon.
Yeah, I think we're actually full of contradictions. I do put us more in the camp of being innovative, can-do people. And I'm constantly amazed, actually, when I meet New Zealanders overseas, that there is a characteristic that I think of as sort of quintessentially New Zealand, which is, you know, we're not a bunch of whiners by and large, although sometimes it's hard to believe that when you read certain papers or you listen to certain talkback shows. I think we do have a tendency to get in there and roll up our sleeves, but I think we also delude ourselves a lot. You know, we like to think of ourselves as egalitarian, we like to think of ourselves as fair-minded, but in fact we're incredibly punitive. I think we're very punishing, and we're punishing, obviously, of our children, and I think the Section 59 debate was a really good example of that, and how polarising people's attitudes were around that. We're punishing of wanting to lock people up and lock up more and more. In the last 10 years in this country, we have increased our prison population by 71%. What does that tell us about ourselves? So I think we're really interesting. We're full of these contradictions, actually. We are this amazing group of people who did do things like take a really strong position on anti-nuclear, who did enfranchise women and give women the vote, the first democratic country in the world to do it. You know, we did actually sign the Treaty of Waitangi, although that's very contentious and this is the right place to talk about it. But the thing is, we did do some of those things, and we can be immensely proud of that. But at the same time, we also, for example, have held benefit rates at an all-time, at a low for the last 16 years, and have been incredibly mean-minded about it. So I think, you know, we really are full of contradictions, and I think actually we're very busy constructing certain stories about ourselves with the help of, aided and abetted by a particular type of media, that we have come to accept, including a story that I take particular umbrage with. I'm sorry, I'm just saying it like that. Which is the story of youth criminals, out of control, young people. I mean, I meet the most amazing young people. I've just today read something by a 16-year-old young man from down the Hawke's Bay who plays, you know, all sorts of sports. He's a leader in his community, he's part of his local church, he's involved in his local marae, he does kapaka, he does incredible things, he helps us, lifesaving, you name it, this kid does it. And he is incredible, and we have these young men all over the country and young women like this. And what do we hear? We hear about young criminals. Now I can tell you, because I've looked at the stats in detail, and people simply don't want to believe this. There was an increase in 2007 of violent crime, and we can talk about whether or not that was reporting or what that was. But the biggest increase was actually in the age group 55 plus, but we did not hear a single public foray for boot camps for geriatrics. And I really take exception to that.
I'm just thinking of Brotown. Do you perceive a kind of war on youth that Cindy was kind of referring to, that in fact we talk about loving children, but in fact they are, treated like a separate species?
Yeah, I do. I do think we're very hard on our young people. You know, we have these organisations that are dedicated to leadership, and they have these days where they get inspiring speakers and try and get them to be leaders, and I'm thinking, but they're still little. Why do we want them to be leaders already? Then we hear people complain that young people just want to be famous, or they want to be All Blacks, or they want to be models. So what? When you're young, you want to be those things. Some of them will grow out of it. And I think we just place far too much of a burden when really, you know, I heard someone say recently, we look at children as the problem, but they're the solution.
Got a quote from Michael King here. I wonder what's happened to Michael King. He finished his book, you know, that wonderful Penguin History of New Zealand, by saying, if I can find it, that he suggests that Kiwis are good-hearted, practical, commonsensical and tolerant. That's not what we're getting here.
He was such an optimist, wasn't he?
Well, he had to be.
He was talking about race relations in it to a large extent when he wrote that, wasn't he?
Well, that was the very end of the book, so presumably he was attempting to summarise the character of New Zealand, and which sort of illustrates why it's extremely dangerous to try and attempt that sort of definition, particularly on a panel like this, because if we aren't monocultural and monochromatic and one-dimensional, then it should be too difficult to point to one definition of ourselves and say that, that definition or that work of art, whether it's a Whaddarwe or a Little Burn composition or a great novel, we shouldn't be capable of being encapsulated in one work of art or definition like that. And I think that's what's coming through here, isn't it?
Yeah.
If there's anything, I think we're a group of people who happen to be in a sort of state of multicultural denial. And as a geologist at Te Papa, I see this all the time. We claim to be a bicultural institution. Well, it just ain't like that. Reality is very, very different in New Zealand. We need to get around that.
Well, let's do a little
People in
survey.
Melbourne have.
Let's do a little survey of people in this room. Māori, raise your hands. Pākehā. Far out.
You've just done it well done, Oscar.
Samoan,
You're outnumbered too.
Chinese, Korean, Indian.
What about New Zealanders?
Well, you see, and maybe this is a good
We're
time to
all
talk about
New
that
Zealanders.
term, but the term New Zealanders can really only apply to Pākehā and Māori, because you look at a Pākehā person, they say they're a New Zealander. Yeah, I can see that. You look at a Māori person, they say they're a New Zealander. Yeah, I can see that. You look at anyone else, and we have to, like, I'm a Samoan New Zealander. People put that hyphenated thing with me. These Chinese New Zealanders, these African New Zealanders, these Indian New Zealanders. So the term New Zealander, I think, cancels out a lot of that multiculturalism that you were talking about.
There's that terrible question that I'm responsible for. What are you? Well, it was never rhetorical in the sense that I knew the answer. Forskin, who articulated the question, he didn't know the answer either, and I still have no idea what the answer is. But I do know that there is a kind of response that's going on, and it's not about having huge expectations of, as I was talking about before, about one thing actually defining what we are. What is happening, I think, is there's this wonderful mosaic of small pebbles, different colours and sizes that are gradually assuming a shape and a form. And it might be Little Burn's symphonies, it might be Simonet's wedding, I would hope that maybe Forskin's Lament is one little pebble there too. But this developing mosaic is gradually showing us what we are, and not just what we are, but what we were, and probably giving us signs for the future. But it's not about individual works. It's actually about the wholeness of what we're doing, and that's just on the art front.
Do you have anything in the front of your mind other than just the characters and the dialogue? Or, I mean, are you trying to say anything beyond make us laugh?
No. We're just trying to make you laugh. But because of who we are and the experiences we've had and the fact that we've grown up here, been shaped by this environment, what comes out is just are those questions. But those aren't forefront on our minds, otherwise it would be really stink. But it's funny, I don't think we need to keep asking who are we should just be who we are. And what comes out is like what Greg was saying, he was writing about an intensely personal experience that only he would know. And yet in the process of that, it did end up challenging myths about us. And so who we are is what this place makes us and how we express that.
The thing that I think if you're being really honest in your writing, you are going to upset people, and it's not about, writers aren't role models and their characters aren't role models. I remember when I was writing a police show had endless problems with the PR person for the police, who believed that our policeman should be a role model for the police. I said, sorry, it's a drama.
Well, that's what the critic of Brotown thought. I think implicitly what she was saying was that this drama should be role model. You should be presenting positive role models for young Pacific youth with fart jokes. Hey.
Well, see, then it wouldn't be very funny.
Precisely.
But hopefully the process that some of us who work on the show are actually have jobs and careers where we express ourselves and are able to do that and get paid for it. Hopefully that is seen as the role model thing. The fact that we're helping to make it. I mean, it's not just the Naked Samoans, it's a real multicultural operation. But like you were talking before about busting myths, and you know, Brotown gets called Pacific humour a lot, and that's actually incorrect. It's New Zealand humour. Otherwise, New Zealanders wouldn't get it. If only Islanders got it, that would be 260,000 people. Half of whom are Samoan. But we all grew up here, and we were shaped by this place, and so we consider it New Zealand humour. It's funny, you know, but because we happen to be brown, you know, that's what I was saying before about the hyphenation. It's like as soon as you're something different, other people put a different filter on that, when really you're just the kid who grew up in Te Atatu, got a job in town, went to Rutherford, lived in Christchurch for a little bit, and then Wellington, and then Plymouth, and then Auckland. You know? But people look at us and go, oh, bloody Samoan humour. It's not. But we get labelled that, you know. When Funny Business came out, people didn't say, oh, it's Pakeha humour. You know? But yet, as soon as there are ethnics involved, it's suddenly not New Zealand. You know, it's sort of like a subset of New Zealand.
Do you think there's perhaps a tendency, you know, overall in New Zealand to try to define ourselves? That is a slight sign of immaturity to an extent.
I think there is. I was contemplating this question of what are we with a friend of mine, Elizabeth, and I said to her, Elizabeth, what do you think? What are we? And she said something, I'd like to share it with you all now. She said, we're the country that wonders about what are we more than any other country in the world. And I agree, and so I wonder whether other countries have talks like this, where they are going, what are we? Look at our navels. Let's gaze some more. I'm sure they're just getting on with living.
You wonder whether the Norwegians are sleeping as fretfully as we are. The Japanese or the Iraqis or the Eritreans, I can swap beds with any of them.
And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think it's great that we continually do this, and I think it's just a signal that maybe we're the world's youngest country, and we are young enough to still be figuring out our identity. You know, I reckon if New Zealand went to high school, we would be the sort of, I think we'd be at pimply teenage status, where we're still trying to, we want everyone to like us.
Second year, fifth formers.
Well, I think currently we're in the fourth form, and we've got two choices, to go to fifth or to go straight to sixth form and miss school C. And I think we have the capacity to do either. But I think we spend far too much time in our heads wondering about who we are.